Thank you so much, and welcome all to this session that will focus on curbing emissions with small nuclear systems that use fission energy technologies. My name is Shannon Bragg-Sitton, and I'm the Director of the Integrated Energy and Storage Systems Division at Idaho National Laboratory, the U.S. lead laboratory for nuclear energy. We are seeing governments and technology developers around the world now considering nuclear energy as a contributor in reaching net zero goals. The recent documentary by Oliver Stone, Nuclear Now, also tries to dispel the myths and misconceptions around nuclear energy. The first nuclear reactor was built in 1942, more than 80 years ago, and there are now close to 500 reactors operating worldwide. Most new reactors are being built in China, India, and Russia, but the U.S. also recently started a new unit in the state of Georgia. Historically, these nuclear plants have been large, expensive, centralized projects producing a gigawatt or more of electricity. But today, nuclear energy is seeing a revival with the development of smaller, lower cost, and more distributed solutions. Small modular reactors, or SMRs, are well suited to more remote regions, offshore deployments, hydrogen production, focused industrial applications that may require heat or steam, or as an ideal complement to smaller scale renewable installations. And today we see over 70 companies developing advanced nuclear technologies around the world, many of which are just a few megawatts to a few hundred megawatts per unit. I'm joined by the founders and CEOs of 3 of these advanced nuclear fission companies, and I'm looking forward to the conversation we'll have with them. First, let's go to Bret Kugelmass. Bret is the CEO and founder of Last Energy, which is based in Washington, D.C. Last Energy is developing a small pressurized water reactor, essentially a smaller version of the current fleet reactors we have operating. These are designed to cost about $100 million US per unit, and they are very compact, fitting within an American football field. Bret, you've come to the nuclear industry from a different starting point than most. In fact, I fondly recall meeting you several years ago as you interviewed me for one of your first installments of the very popular Titans of Nuclear podcast. Can you tell us more about why you founded Last Energy and how you are approaching this challenge of getting advanced nuclear energy into the marketplace?
Yes, great to be here. Thank you so much for that great intro as well. My story is a little bit different than most entrepreneurs in the nuclear sector. I didn't come from the nuclear industry. As a matter of fact, I came from Silicon Valley and formerly developing other technology companies, but realizing that climate change required nuclear brought me here. I used the Titans of Nuclear podcast as a way to explore and really try to hone in on what was the right problem to solve in the sector. And after interviewing for almost 2 years, over 1,500 people, including yourself and many, many others, I came to the conclusion that the challenge that was necessary in order to drastically reduce the cost of deploying new nuclear had nothing to do with the reactor core, but rather the business model, the manufacturing model, the regulatory model. And so at Last Energy, we built a 20 megawatt micro PWR, pressurized water reactor, that is meant to be mass manufactured. But most importantly, we don't touch the core. No material science changes, no changes to the fuel, no changes to the process. It's just a shrunken down PWR, just like Belgium's first reactor or the NS Savannah, meant to be mass manufactured. And we've had incredible commercial success this last year, selling over 50 such power plants throughout Europe.
Thank you, Bret. That really is fascinating. I like the idea of turning the industry on its head, thinking about things differently in order to overcome this challenge of getting these technologies to market. So next, let's turn to Mikal, who is the chairman and CEO of Core Power based in the United Kingdom. I understand Core Power is co-developing molten salt reactors that could be used in electric cargo ships and to support floating industrial facilities. This design only requires refueling after operating 2 or 3 decades, which is very similar to nuclear-powered submarines. These last a very long time. Mikal, I understand that you've been working with TerraPower, which is backed by Bill Gates, for reactor design, and that you're also working toward mass manufacturing, as Bret has just described. How did you come to nuclear and to the current technology solution you're working on?
Well, thanks, Shannon. Pleased to be here with you today, and thanks for the introduction. As you indicate, I come from the maritime industry. I worked for 30 years in ocean transportation, and that's the market that we think has a real need for these new technologies. It's a $7 trillion industry which transports close to 90% of global trade or exported goods, and as a result, it's the sort of backbone of global trade. We consume 350 million tons of fossil fuels every year. It's about 4 billion megawatt hours of energy, and we emit over 1 billion tons of CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions. So, the problem is we've been mandated to go to zero emissions by 2050, and that simply can't be done. Alternative fuels produced, in the conventional way, ammonia, methanol, which is being produced today from natural gas. If we were to do that, we would increase the share of global transportation's emissions by a factor of about 5 times, from 3% to 15%, and that simply isn't a solution. So we're coming at this from the point of view that here is an industry that's extremely hard to abate, and it needs nuclear power, but it needs a different and new way of doing it. There is a reason we don't have this today. So I started CorePower back in 2018 to build this new technology based on the molten salt reactor. We're now building at INL, where you work, Shannon, and also help create a framework for how this is regulated and to build a brand new market for new nuclear in maritime. It's a big challenge, and we have to be brave and we have to think big to solve it.
Absolutely, Mikal, and I look forward to seeing that first unit operating here at INL and understand how that's operating. I think that you're really tackling a global challenge of the hard-to-abate sectors with maritime transportation. And I hope that this technology is successful in the near term to abate those emissions. Finally, I'll turn to Stefano Buono, CEO of NewCleo, based in the UK as well as Italy. NewCleo is developing yet another type of reactor, a lead-cooled fast-spectrum nuclear reactor that will operate using nuclear fuels that are derived from depleted uranium and plutonium from stockpiles of nuclear waste. Stefano is a physicist that founded a nuclear medicine company initially, and that was later acquired for billions. Stefano, how and why did you transition from medicine to the energy generation sector?
Well, actually, I was the first transition that was strange, because I started as a nuclear physicist and I was working for many years on this kind of technology. So from the 90s. The idea and the motivation at that time was to create a nuclear system that was safer. So we had just had the accident of Chernobyl, and we were looking for the concept of passive safety. In that search for a safe reactor, we found lead, the idea of using lead as a coolant rather than sodium. And this, as you mentioned, would open the possibility of multi-recycling the nuclear waste. You know that any reactor today is using essentially 0.5% or maximum 1% of the power that is in the uranium that is extracted. With a multi-recycling, in principle, you can use 100% of it. So you have now a lot of waste that has been generated and the uranium extracted that can be used as fuel. And this could fuel for hundreds of years our reactor. So there is a mine of extracted uranium that we could use using this multi-recycling. So on top of the objective of having a safer reactor, so a reactor that can implement passive safety system, and lead is a key element to reach this objective in an economic way. We have also added this mission to burn the plutonium that is in excess today in Europe. There is free plutonium in France and UK that need to be disposed. So we are joining these two missions, and we do it, of course, with a small size, because we have to be small and modular like everyone else here in this meeting.
Thank you, Stefano. I think you've highlighted some really important aspects of the revival of nuclear energy technologies, focusing on continued advances in passive safety and closing the nuclear fuel cycle. In fact, looking across these three technologies that are being developed, I think we have a really beautiful set of solutions where we can utilize fuel from one technology to drive another technology and move toward a very clean, sustainable energy system. So now that we've heard a little bit more about each of your companies and what you're developing, ranging from small-scale water-cooled reactors to molten salt-cooled and lead-cooled fast reactors, I'd like to dive in a little bit more about how you see these novel nuclear fission systems truly fitting into that broader energy landscape in the coming decades. How is this round of technology development different from its predecessors? Bret, let's start with you and then move through our panelists.
So I think one of the things that we've really tried to hone in on is a difference in business model. And so we act almost as a utility where we will cut out the middleman and we'll sell energy as a service to direct off-takers. And then just like one would in the industrial gases sector, we'll find a plot of land next to those facilities, develop our own project, connect a private cable, and be able to deliver power directly to our customer. And so that's one of the ways that we think that we're able to unlock a whole new set of opportunities and a whole new set of stakeholders and cut through a lot of the bureaucracy by innovating on the business model as well as the technology.
Fantastic. Mikal?
Well, I think, Shannon, we're finally getting to the point where if we're going to move off fossil fuels, which is really what the big discourse is in the world today, we don't really have a choice. Nuclear is the only reliable solution we have, and it's not just about electricity to the grid. It's about heavy industry, as Bret just said. It's about transport. It's those really hard to abate sectors of the economy, as well as poorer countries that have to leapfrog the fossil fuel revolution to get the energy that they need. And that means, in my opinion, new ways of doing nuclear. It doesn't have to be different technologies, but different business models, different deployment models, different way of doing these things so we can bring things to market faster, we can do it cheaper, which means smaller, simpler, cheaper with a shift, I think, as Stefano has pointed out, from active safety, not so much about more safety, it's about shift from active safety to passive safety, because at the end of the day, it's about the physics of the machine, not the skills of the people that we're going to have to rely on here. Human error is the greatest cause of most accidents, and with the one that we're looking at, the molten salt reactor, that's no longer much of an issue. So I think there are many different things that come into this to enable us to bring new nuclear up close and personal, if you like.
Absolutely. Stefano, what would you like to add on this?
Maybe I could add the fact that we are transitioning very much in the business model, but there is also a transition from a governmental approach, especially in Europe, into a private approach. So we have to try to let private money to flow into the system, not governmental money. Private money is fast. We need to return on investment that is faster. So our recipe is to control the cost of nuclear. So our aim is to have €4 per watt installed, which is in the low side, of course, of the cost of a nuclear reactor, but also to do energy production system faster. So today in Europe, unfortunately, we have bad records of having a lot of money deployed for a very long time, more than 10 years, up to more than 10 years. So we have to reduce the building and this investment phase to less than 3 years. So even if we produce a, let's say, medium-sized modular reactor, because we want to produce 200 megawatt electric, we still need to do it in 3 years. So the model is changing also because of the deployment of the capital, not only because of the cost.
I love hearing this shift in thinking on business models, lower cost technologies, faster in getting systems to market, and of course, mass manufacturing, really helping us to shift to an economies of quantity approach versus economies of scale that we have seen historically. And one thing I'm really curious about as you're starting to look at these different market segments, I'd like to understand from your perspective how those markets and the local communities around those markets are really beginning to perceive nuclear energy as an option to their future energy needs, and how that may or may not be affecting your development speed and financing, and how you are gaining that market support. Let's start with Mikal this time.
Thanks, Shannon. Core Power's got backing from close to 100 separate investors now, mostly from industrial, strategic, transport investors, large corporations that are looking to secure this technology into their value chain in the future, becoming customers, if you like. And one of the things that I think we are able to demonstrate with setting down the criteria for how new nuclear in maritime would work, specifically from Core Power's perspective, is that we've got to be able to provide a benefit to everyone. It's not just the company that has bought and deployed the energy system around the reactor and getting the electricity or the work from that. Is also those communities around it. So having a new form of nuclear that we can bring close to population centers, into waterways and into ports, docking at berths in ports, etc., and providing electricity in those really hard to abate sectors without the liability risk and without the environmental risk around it that's perceived by populations. I think we're starting to rewrite the contract with the public, and we're seeing this from big ports, we're seeing this from industry, we're seeing this from port communities that are really wondering, what are we going to do? How are we going to clean up our environment? How are we going to decarbonize these massive installations that we live nearby and work in? And here comes a technology that's small, it's friendly, it's clean, it doesn't have the sort of risk profile that's perceived of more conventional technologies. And as a result, I think we can rewrite that contract. It hasn't happened yet, but it's a gradual shift from sort of, lightly skeptical to enthusiastic. And I think, as I said before, bringing nuclear more up close and personal creates that bridge between confidence and familiarity. And that's what we need. A little knowledge goes a long way with nuclear, and we all know it.
Yes, I can testify probably the enthusiasm around nuclear by the investor community. Today, I raised already 400 million. I'm in the process of raising 1 billion, which is rather a successful process. So it's really a lot of money. But I'm raising this money from a large number of people. Of course, there are funds, or some banks, some institutions, but there is overall the people, family office, and people who wants to put the money. And so I have been asked to invest every day. And I think the motivation of this investor is not yet a financial objective, but is really the one of letting a project in nuclear fly in Europe, because most of my investors comes from Europe. So there is really a shift already in the mind of people in which nuclear can contribute to our progress, not only for the decarbonization, but in Europe also for energy independence that has become an issue for Europe because of the war with Russia and our dependence historical from gas, of course, from Russia.
I think you're right that confluence of national security and energy security and energy independence are really driving some new discussions around energy options. Bret, what would you like to add?
I mean, I agree with everything that they've said. There has been a noticeable shift, but I do want to emphasize that shift is not necessary and should not be used as like a foundation for permission to go build. Certain societies have always loved nuclear and have a longstanding tradition of supporting it and still do support it. So whether we had half or even 2/3 of the countries against it, that's no excuse not to build where people love it. And that's always been our approach. Go to the lowest hanging fruit. Like, it's not our job right now to convince everyone to love nuclear. Our job is to prove that we can build it cost effectively and then use the incredible success generated from that to open it up to new markets and change people's perception after we have a track record of success.
I'd like to underscore something you just said, Bret. It's not about making everyone love a single technology, and that goes for any of the technologies. We have a limited set of clean energy technologies in our toolbox, and the right mix is different in each regional deployment location and for each of the markets. And so understanding what the option space is and proving that nuclear energy can be affordable and it can be built in a timely fashion is key to showing that it is truly a part of our clean energy toolbox and that we need to embrace that where it makes sense. So fully agree with that. one thing I find interesting is as we look around the field of these advanced nuclear technology developers, I mentioned more than 70 companies starting up and developing advanced technologies. Some of those are coming out of what I might consider a giant in the field, companies that have been around decades, thousands of employees. And then we have companies like your own, which are much smaller, bringing fresh, new thinking, new approaches. Love to hear your thoughts on how that has affected your progress. Is it a challenge going against these giants, or is it perhaps a fresh look and new opportunity?
Well, I have the example of medicine because you mentioned that I had a successful. I think there is no conflict between a biotech and a big pharma. They are doing different job, and there is an opportunity for small companies to act faster and take a decision, and use the private money for a purpose that is one project. So there is a dynamic that is happening, which is similar to the one of biotech into medicine. There is a role of a small company to accelerate the innovation, and I think we are fulfilling this role.
Can I add to that, Stefano? I think that's a very good point you're making, and to answer Shannon's question. I think it's actually the other way around. It's very encouraging to see incumbent technology developers, large corporations coming in and sort of being in this field rather than just doing what they've always done before. And for us, younger companies, in that scale-up phase that we're in, like Core Power, it's very encouraging then to see the discussions and debates that we have with those companies, but also see those, I have to say, giant corporations that are coming in and investing in us and what we're doing. Some of our investors are, hundreds of times bigger than I think we'll ever become. And they do it for a reason, not just because they think they can make a little bit of money out of something which is now becoming popular, but because they have a real, genuine future customer need for this, right? And their customers themselves, etc. That part of that energy transition that does something new and different. I think it's extremely encouraging to see the largest corporations developing this technology and other large corporations, even larger corporations, investing in the young startup and scale-up companies that are coming through here. Just a sort of word of warning for everyone who's listening to this, of course, you say there are 70 companies developing technology. There is, going to be a much thinner field as we move forward, as you probably imagine. So the choice is, in fact, rather limited.
So I agree with a lot of what I've heard, and it is the right perspective to have that a rising tide floats all boats, especially in this industry. That being said, we shouldn't be naive. The incumbents include, both in nuclear, but also in the broader energy space, they're sharks, and you can't like assume that they're going to want to be there to help you out. And so how we've approached this is by trying to carve out a niche where we are not directly competitors against them, because if we tried to compete head on with the incumbents, does not matter how good your technology is, you will lose. So we just go for customers that because of their size or location, they can't provide for, and try to stay away from that direct competition.
Yeah, I wanted to add, this is also a little bit our approach. The fact of having the possibility to burn the nuclear waste is helping us in the relationship with the big companies. In France, we are becoming a partner of EDF because we have 40 tons of the all-fuel superphenix that we can burn, because we can maybe reduce their storage of fuel, used fuel, etc., etc. So there is also, let's say, complementarity that is possible with the big companies.
Absolutely. And that's why I mentioned we've got a diverse set of technologies represented here. They can be complementary to large-scale systems, and they can be complementary to renewables and be a very good backbone to a clean energy grid, and provide the reliability and resilience as well as that sustainability as we begin to close that fuel cycle, as your technology does, Stefano. One thing I'd like to understand, and as I go to various audiences talking about advanced nuclear technologies, a leading question that I get is, when will these really be available? When can I order one? There are many companies that are frankly chomping at the bit for these technologies to be available. And there's a lot of promises out there around the technologies. Some of these companies are merely paper reactors right now. Some are moving well through hardware demonstrations. So I'd like to understand when you believe we can realistically see your technologies and related technologies deployed. Where are you in the regulatory and licensing process? And when do you think that first operational facility will be ready to go?
I can start if you like. I think it's very important for everyone to recognize that nuclear is difficult, not because it has to be, but it has become difficult, and we have to recognize that. And it takes time. It's very important that we do things right rather than do things quickly, as you probably noticed with just a few accidents and mishaps in the past. It creates an issue around this. So we've got to do this right, which means that you have to go through many hoops in order to get through the various stages of development. I think the way we see this, with a sort of public-private initiative that we were in together with the U.S. Department of Energy, and so U.S. government support for this, which sort of lends a little bit of additional weight to the licensing and regulatory side, at least domestically in the United States as well. We see that there is a process through several stages, and the final sort of first commercial prototype, the demonstration prototype, is likely to be there sometime between 2032 and 2035. But that doesn't mean that we're starting now and we sort of think that we can get it all done in 9 or 10 years. We started in 2013, so that's effectively a 2-decade development program to get all of that incredibly hard to find data up onto the surface, and to get this licensed, regulated, deployed, built at scale in the right kind of environment. And then you can take it from there. Then you can say, right, okay, we got one now, we'll build a second and a third, etc. And we, in the marine environment, obviously used to shipyard manufacturing. So it's not just about manufacturing as Bret and Stefano are saying, and as I'm saying as well, sort of manufacturing reactors, but it's the entire power plant, if you like. A floating nuclear power plant is built from scratch in a modular fashion in the shipyard, and then can be moved to where it's needed, moved back to where it came from when you've finished with it. So you change, if you like, the entire ecosystem around it. So once we've got the first 1, 2, maybe 5 built as serially prototype machines, I think that can be scaled in a very effective way.
Excellent. I saw Stefano pop in here.
Yes, we have initiated the interaction with the French regulatory authorities because we want to build our first manufacturing facility for the fuel and our first reactor in France. The aim is 2030, is a long time. But we have a new technology. The technology exists, but we have to implement a new design. So we need this time in Europe.
Thank you. And Bret?
So since we're not inventing anything new, our novelty is in the systems integration and manufacturability of our plant. We intend to have our first plant ready to go live in 2025.
Wow.
And that's from a manufacturing and supply chain perspective, in which we already lined up the entire supply chain with contracts and have already started manufacturing in Houston, Texas. That being said, licensing can take longer. And so while we hope that we can get a license within the next 2 years, we're realistic and understand that it might take 3 or 4. But our power plant will be ready to go before the end of 2025.
That is excellent news, Bret. And I think that's excellent news to many of those industrial companies that are looking to nuclear energy to help them move toward decarbonization. And I think it's important for the audience to understand that these technologies that are in development, while highly varied, are essentially technologies that have been researched for decades. There's a lot of data that can be pulled from historical work, a lot of lessons learned from previous research and development approaches. So I think now it's all coming to fruition, and we have a lot to bring to the field now in our energy system solutions. And I know we are down to the end of the wire on our time. This has been a fascinating discussion hearing about these technologies. And I'd like to give you each just a quick moment here at the end to share any final thoughts and a quick lightning round. I'll start with Bret.
The message I always love to leave on, which is always a little bit controversial, is stop talking about safety. You can design a safe reactor, that's fine. The more you talk about it, the more you scare people. Stop talking about safety.
That's not the first time I've heard that message, and I think you're absolutely correct. We have a very safe technology that we are developing. Mikal, your thoughts?
Moving transport of global trade away from fossil fuels presents an unsurmountable challenge of scale, and only nuclear can actually do that. So we need to have a new nuclear solution, and that's what we're building at Core Power.
Fantastic. And Stefano?
Yes, I would like not to hear that there is competition among the technologies. I think the group of companies that is innovating today, they can all be. Many can be present on the market at the same time because our market needs a lot of growth in the electricity production. Europe is forecasted to need to grow 3 times the electricity production by 2050. So that's the message. Let's collaborate, especially really in explaining to the people that there is no danger in the nuclear and is the technology of the future.
Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts, your technologies, and I love ending on that note of collaboration. We have a grand challenge ahead of us globally to get to net zero emissions across all of our energy use sectors, and we can't get there alone. I'm excited to have colleagues and collaborators such as yourselves out in the field working toward this common goal of net zero energy that is reliable, resilient, and sustainable. Thank you so much for the time today. I encourage our audience to reach out to those of us here on this panel, as well as others in the field if you'd like to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you.